This is important, listen carefully, because I get a lot of questions about this. And unfortunately we live in times where there is too much confusion. There are too many people spreading doubt, even from the sacred minbar of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, spreading their ignorance as opposed to spreading knowledge. At a time when people are bombarded with misconceptions, you have people spreading doubt. Who said this and who said that? So listen carefully to this. A lot of people ask about the authenticity of a hadith. Who says this hadith is authentic? Who says it's authentic? How much do you know about the authenticity of a hadith? Do you even know how the word hadith is spelled in Arabic? I mean, no disrespect, brothers and sisters, but let's stick to what we know. Let's stick to our fields of expertise. If you're an expert in hadith, then bring it up, bring it on, and let's talk about this. If you're not an expert, then what are we even doing wasting our time talking about the authenticity of a hadith? Do you know how the hadiths were collected? Do you know the history of Shia hadith and the way they were preserved and protected and transmitted to us in this day and age? Do you know what the companions of the Imams had to go through for these hadiths to be preserved and protected? Do you know the stories of people like Ibn Abi Umayr, whose tradition scholars today accept with closed eyes? They accept all of the mursalat of Ibn Abi Umayr. A mursal is a hadith that doesn't even have a chain of narrations. A chain of narrators, that is. A mursal is where Ibn Abi Umayr says, قال علي بن أبي طالب, قال جعفر بن محمد الصادق, قال محمد الباقر. That's it. No chain, no rijal, no series of transmitters so that we could go and scrutinize. And yet, scholars today accept the traditions of Ibn Abi Umayr, no questions asked. Why? Because these are people who were giants of this field. These are people who were accepted as being 100% authentic. They never say a word that was not uttered by the Imam, that didn't originate from the sacred mouth of the infallible. Not once. These people would not only memorize the hadith. Today, I mean, with all the junk that we eat, and all the genetically modified crops, and all the stuff that's out there, and all the time that we waste, and the shrinking attention spans, thanks to the internet, thanks to TV, thanks to Twitter and Facebook, of course you're not going to be able to memorize a hadith. Of course I won't be able to keep in my memory even 20 or 30 or 50 ahadith or verses of the Qur'an. Back in those days, they lived a life of purity, both physically as well as spiritually. Number one. Number two, that's what allowed them to memorize all these ahadith. Number two, traditions tell us that people like Zurara ibn A'yan used to carry tablets in his pocket. Not the digital kind, but the physical kind. Tablets where they wrote, in other words, notebooks. We have a hadith where somebody comes to Zurara, he says to him, I want to know what Imam al-Sadiq said about a specific topic. So Zurara takes out his tablet, or let's just say his notebook, and he says to him, look at this page. Don't look at the page before, don't look at the page after. This is what you need, just look at this. They protected the hadith with their own lives. Oh, who says the 4 books are authentic? Who says Al-Kafi is authentic? Are you kidding me? How much do you know about how the formative periods of these books and these treatises and these collections of hadith came together? How much do you know about these things? I've said to people before who insist on rejecting these ahadith or refuse to accept the authenticity of these ahadith en masse, I've said, keep your mouth shut. No offense, but if you're a doctor and I started debating you about a medical thing, you're going to tell me keep your mouth shut, right? You're going to tell me, who are you to talk to me about this? I spent 10, 12 years before I became a doctor. I know what I'm talking about. You don't. It's the same with hadith. How were these books collected? The vast majority of the hadiths found in Al-Kafi as well as Al-Kutub Al-Arba'a, which are the main collections of hadith, trace their authenticity back to a hadith that we call Al-Usul Al-Arba'imi'ah. Let me give you like a short Hadith 101 course. Al-Usul Al-Arba'imi'ah means the fundamental 400 collections of hadith. These hadiths were written down by hand by people who attended classes of Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Sadiq, the prior Imams, the subsequent Imams. They would write them down. They were compiled into 400 collections. The 400 fundamentals, right? 400 collections of hadith. Then the companions brought these 400 fundamental collections to Imams like Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam, like Imam al-Jawad, infallible Imams, looked at the 400 fundamental collections, authenticated them, then signed at the bottom saying all of them are authentic. Al-Kafi takes his hadiths from those 400 fundamentals. They were signed off by the infallible Imam. And yet people dare to say, who says Al-Kafi is authentic? 80% of Al-Kafi, 70% of Al-Kafi is not authentic. And you know what this does? Well-meaning, devout, committed, religious young men and women like most of you here tonight are now afraid to even open a book of hadith because they have that preconceived notion that, oh, most of hadith are not authentic. The exact opposite is true. Over 95% of a hadith are 100% authentic. There might be one or two here and there, and that's where the scholarship comes in. Most of these hadith, by the way, are not transmitted from one person to another. A transmission is what? Is for you to hear me say قال الصادق on the pulpit, and then for you to then go and tell your brother or your friend that so-and-so said such on the minbar. This is what transmission is called. Most of the ahadith in Al-Kafi are not transmissions. What are they? In Arabic we call them mashyakha. Mashyakha is when you come and you study under a scholar of hadith, and that scholar then gives you permission to transmit the hadiths that he has given you. Then you give the hadiths that you have memorized or learnt to another student of yours. It's not one person telling another and that person telling a third. It's about one teacher giving his student and the student then teaching what he has learned to his student. And in doing so, these ahadith are authenticated, protected, preserved. Every letter in the ahadith is accounted for. Let's have some submission, brothers and sisters. If it doesn't make sense, if it contradicts the intellect, if you see a hadith that says God sits on the back of a donkey and descends to earth every Thursday night to inspect his kingdom, right? Alhamdulillah, we don't have that hadith. Other schools of thought believe this. If you ever saw that hadith in one of our books, you are more than welcome to take the hadith and to throw it away. Why? Because this is contradictory to the intellect. My intellect, my rational judgment tells me that God is too lofty, too sublime, too great to be confined to time and space, let alone sit on the back of a donkey. My intellect tells me this can't possibly be right. But my intellect doesn't tell me that Salat al-Fajr can't possibly be 2 rak'at. It simply fails to grasp the notion. There's a difference. And if your intellect fails to grasp the notion, that's where you show submission and taslim. And that's the case with most ahadith.